myself, actually. So 2 minutes will be 2 minutes. Yeah, like you said, Brian Afande, I co-founded a company called Black Rhino VR. We're based in Nairobi. I'm the managing director, and what we did was we started out as a 360 and immersive film company, but over the years we've been able to grow our service offering and our proposition to be more focused on the extended reality spectrum. So you have virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. We focus in two of those verticals, which is virtual reality and augmented. So we create content and solutions for different organizations and clients. Apart from that, we also have our outreach programs, which we believe is part of just growing the ecosystem and our community. We happen to be the first people who are officially serious about VR and XR in Nairobi. So we figured that we looked at it as a gift, and we started building a lot of, people who are working in silos. So we started bringing these silos together to ensure that, we are trying to create value in circulation for XR in terms of demonstrating what it can do economically and socially as well. So we have 3 projects that we are running. The Moran Story Lab, which is a 360 immersive journalism school for women. It's a free school for women. We take 6 students per cohort. We have State of the Art, which is a partnership with Goethe-Institut about empowering artists with immersive technology. And then we have XR Without Borders, which is pretty much coming up with solutions and deploying XR in difficult contexts so that people can start really trusting the technology itself. So I think my 2 minutes are almost up. Yeah, that's pretty much more about me. I hope to get to know each and every panelist as well.
I was about to cut you off.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. We're excited to have you. The next panelist is Wendy Ndaki. She's a visual artist and a writer. She's also part of a Pan-African game developers community called Enter Africa. Please, Wendy, introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you. So as you've heard, my name is Wendy. I'm a visual artist and a writer, and I'm actually currently part of the Moran Story Lab that Brian has talked about. And it's an exciting experience so far. I am also a scriptwriter. I write for I write scripts for games. I'm currently working on one on an award-winning game called Kaza 3D game. And I'm also contributing writer for Ludic Works, which is a Pan-African publishing, video game publishing company based in Kenya. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wendy. Our next panelist is a veteran in this industry, Jay Shapiro, who is the founder and CEO of Usiku Games. Please, Jay, give yourself a befitting introduction.
Thanks, Sheila. Hi, everybody. So I'm the CEO and founder of Usiku Games based here in Nairobi, Kenya. We are a social impact gaming company. We say we make games that make a difference. And so all of our games have some element of education or behavioral change built into them. They are by definition non-violent, gender balanced, mobile, and most importantly made in Africa for Africa, featuring local music that we custom compose, local artwork, heroes, environments, that sort of thing. We're also hosts of the Nairobi Game Development Center, which is in Parklands at Diamond Plaza, which is a 6,000 square foot, 2-story co-working community space for the game development community in Kenya. And we're trying to basically incubate this new industry and bring people to a greater professional level where they can expand across the continent. So that's me, and I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you so much, Jay. If you're a developer, you really have to visit this center. It's amazing. Our third panelist is Jake. Jake is a director and producer. He's also a guru and an expert in this industry. Jake Manion, please give yourself a befitting introduction.
Thanks, Sheila. Yeah, guru might be pushing it. Yeah, so as you said, yeah, I'm a game director, producer, originally from the UK. I've been in Kenya for some years, about 4 years now, working on games with studios across the continent, not just Kenya. Most recently with a small studio called Internet of Elephants, who are a small indie completely focused on games that benefit wildlife and its preservation. So our latest title is this mobile augmented reality game called Wilderverse. It puts the player in the shoes of like a wildlife scientist as they explore these life-size holographic forests, which are projected all around them in the real world. Prior to coming here, I was a director at Aardman Animations in the UK in the games division, working on kind of BAFTA level games and other digital media, mainly across web and mobile. And I think that's about it. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. I'm here to push all the limits, so don't worry about the guru name. So the next, the panelist is Kish. Kish Irani is also a veteran in the industry. He was born in Nairobi, but now he's based in the UK. Kish, kindly go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, Jambo, everybody. Yes, that's true. I was born in Nairobi, so I might get some chance to speak some Swahili later on. Let's see. Yes, I moved to Britain about 30 years ago, quite some time ago. So I moved as a teenager. I work in the video games industry. Currently, I'm a CTO of a new startup. I work as a mentor. I work as a speaker, board advisor as well. And also the chair of BAME Games, which is Black, Asian, minority ethnic in video games, promoting inclusion and diversity here in Britain and Europe to some extent. So that's me.
Thank you, Kish. I will be joined at some point of this panel with a co-panel moderator, Tosen, who is the founder of Amaze Festival. So just before we get him and we lose control of everything else, I'd like to ask a few questions to our panelists. I think I'll start with Wendy. With the current situation, especially with what COVID has done globally, how do you see the industry and what has changed in just this year?
All right. So with the current situation, I feel like it has affected us as a community because we used to have meetups frequently every month. We moved online for a bit, but I could tell also from the online participation, not everyone was able to, tune in. So that has affected the whole meeting up and growing the community. But on the brightest note is that there are also many other events coming up, and not just only Kenyan based, but also African. And so people are still being able to, get events every once in a while, and get the community interacting. But I feel like COVID has affected us in terms of engaging the way we used to. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Brian, what would you say? Is it a similar experience or has it accelerated things at least for you?
Yeah, I would actually say, COVID for us, it's been a technological catalyst. Mm-hmm. We found that, one of the first casualties of COVID was, of course, the tourism and travel industry. And because of this, one of the projects we did was with the government, whereby we're doing it with the Kenya Tourism Board, because people could not travel and get out of their safe spaces, but they needed to be able to feel like they have gone through a safari. So we ended up working on the government on a project that allowed people to actually go online and experience the Great Wildebeest Migration in 360-degree live stream right from the Masai Mara. So this is just an example, one of the classic examples of COVID being really a technological catalyst in terms of companies trying to refine their processes, trying to be agile in understanding what this digital culture is and how they can leverage on it. On my end, physical meetings haven't been, like we're still working from home. Sometimes, of course, we work from the office, but this is not the case for us. I think we've been able to rise above the challenge and see how best we can also create XR, prove that XR in its essence can be something that can be integrated into the economy. And so we've been able to highlight with different clients from B2B models to B2C models, just trying to see how best people can understand the value of XR in the economy. So it's been really good on our end.
Thank you for that. Oh, that is really exciting to hear. Jake, would you say it's a similar experience, especially with the developers and also internet challenges that we have, especially if they have to work from home, or is it different for you?
We've kind of been working from home quite a lot anyway. So like, it hasn't really affected our day-to-day operations as a company. We've got a team that's spread all over the world anyway. So, we're always on Slack and Zoom anyway. So it hasn't really affected us too much. Missed out on face-to-face meetings. Interestingly, the game I mentioned earlier, Wilderverse, this AR game, that was designed and actually launched back in just before Christmas as a game that you could only go and play outside, right? So it got to Christmas, it got to January. Suddenly February and onwards, we started seeing the world kind of locking down and actually stopping people going outside. So, as a product that, you could only go outside and play, that became a real issue. So we quickly, made a version of that, an update to that where you could play it inside, actually benefited the game massively. The other side of that problem was all of our launch strategies for that game involved big open air events at zoos, both in the US and in the UK, and that all had to be cancelled. So, our whole launch strategy for our titles had to change completely, which is quite interesting. I think in terms of games, the industry's done quite well out of it, not just financially, but also in terms of the reputation of games. Right. So previously, that we were seeing all these studies and articles about the harmful effects of games. Now we're starting to see all the studies on the benefits of games. Yes. Right. The mental health benefits, the way that they allow you to socialize even though you're locked in your bedroom now, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue for me to actually ask Jay, especially because of gaming for good. Especially with this new reality where people are seeing the good side of gaming. How has this new reality changed the perception, or what have you seen or noticed now?
So I think it's actually had a pretty huge impact, certainly for us as a company, but I think the industry as a whole. With people being locked down in various locales, certainly in the first few months, there was a big spike that we saw of people being idle and at home and playing games. And I think that really helped to increase awareness of the local industry across the continent. But then for us, we realized because of our social impact nature that a lot of people were feeling not just the health issues and the economic issues of COVID, but also the mental health issues, the sense of anxiety, loneliness, separation. And so we actually took a look at it and realized that people were using, video conferencing calls like this one for the first time for many people in Africa. And we realized that platforms like Zoom, frankly, kind of suck in Africa. They don't have servers on the continent. Call qualities are frankly poor. The payment methods are on a postpaid, not prepaid model, which doesn't work very well in Africa. And frankly, are sucking millions of dollars a month off the continent into external economies at a time when we need it here most. And so we decided to take our gaming platform and our experience with video chatting within the games and turn it into a video conferencing platform that was made in Africa for Africa. And we created what's called Gumzo with a special education element to it for teachers who were doing remote learning. But more importantly, we built games into it because everybody's getting bored of these calls. And so in Gumzo, you can now do charades and jigsaw puzzles and all those sorts of things with the people on the call, making the calls a little bit more fun. And so we've just adapted the gaming platform to the new reality of people being separated because of COVID.
Yeah, that is a really good point. I think we will come to issue of servers in the continent and latency and people who want to play and they can't, especially connecting with the global gaming communities and even experiencing online gaming. But I'd like to come to Kish. How are you seeing this in the global perspective with the new reality?
Okay, I won't speak on behalf of Global because based in the UK,
I'm
Europe
here to push
can say
limits.
for sure. But yeah, it's actually been very positive. Exactly, everybody else, I'll echo that, we are a digital uh, platform as such for developing. So we was very, very quickly, everybody adapted working from home. Uh, as Baymin Games is a charity organization, our bread and butter was literally physically meeting at video game studios where we can get ethnic minority to come and see where they could possibly work. And then the studio where I used to host panels. And so that got cut off completely. But that became incredibly positive after COVID lockdown because it used to be very London centric as a lot of things are, and I'm sure in Kenya everything is Nairobi centric as well. So, but this gave us an opportunity to reach out to the entire UK and Europe as well. So, which means that once we went virtual, all our panels and everything, everybody could dial in, which otherwise would have taken, with most people, would not come in for an evening into London because coming from all across Britain, it probably take you 6 hours to get here or something. So COVID's been pretty positive, and it's been such a success that we're going to carry on these virtual panels so everybody can access those in addition to the physical meets when we will be allowed to have physical meets.
Yeah, that is a really good point. So I think it's accelerating the community in connecting with each other, but also I feel like a lot more people are getting into the community because, to be very honest, there's nothing else to do. And they're seeing a lot of opportunities to connect with people who have similar interest, for instance, in gaming. So Brian, you mentioned something about working with government in experiential, I don't know, what would we call it? In experiencing different things that we used to experience physically. How did that come about, and where do you see this going with, especially with this new reality?
Thank you so much, Sheila, for your question. I think it's important that we realize that in general, we have something called technology anxiety, especially when, according to the research that we've done, we need to try to understand how best different companies, different organizations and individuals can start processing the technology for what it can do for them and try to address some of the problems that they're going through. So for the government was simply sitting down with, it's more like a stakeholder sort of conversation that started. How can we leverage extended reality technology to make sure that we fill in those gaps that are existing? How do we start trusting the technology that we have in our hands? How do we start scaling it? How do we start creating experiences so that also the consumer at the end of the day, the end user, can start experiencing something totally different from your normal sort of experiences? This whole started as a conversation. And I think when you're looking at from a macro level, when you're looking at building a larger community or ecosystem of gaming and emerging technologies, it's very important for us to have these sort of discussions also. Let's start mapping out the kind of activity that's going on ground. You know, like finding out who the real stakeholders are, what is going on ground, what is going on ground. How can we start indexing the activities that are happening on ground? So this was one of the classic examples of a good public-private sort of partnership where the government comes and says, guys, can we be able to achieve this? And people from the private sector, we come and say, guys, by the way, we can achieve this and even more. We can demonstrate the value that this sort of technology has, whether or not it's gaming or extended reality, doesn't really matter. But we really have to start demonstrating it also from a social and economical perspective. So that I know the government is always looking at numbers. They're always seeing, when you look at gaming, the industry itself in Africa, they say it's worth billions, as much as also extended reality is. But when the government gave us an opportunity to do this project, and it came through an agency, so the agency has been tasked to make sure that they represent their clients in a good light, and also find out ways they can channel their funds. So the agency approached us. So we had an interagency conversation with the government as well, just to find out how we can do this. So for me, I think it's very important for us to start working. Public-private sort of partnerships are very, very important for us to even just scale what we are trying to do.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm also just wondering how many people know that these things are happening. Is government deliberate around making sure people know that such things are happening? But we'll come back to that. Let's go to the content side. And Wendy, I'd like to ask you, how can artists, creatives, game developers also leverage these types of opportunities that are opening up in creating locally relevant content, but at the same time that can be experienced by a global audience?
All right. So currently, there are a lot of festivals and also just game jams and events happening regionally and also globally. So I feel as content creators and game developers, we need to think about participating in such events because that's how we also get visible and get to collaborate with other people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I think mentioning the community with Jay, we know the community is very small, especially in Kenya, but it's significantly growing. For other stakeholders or even stakeholders within the industry, how do we ensure that there's more collaboration, or we try to bring as many people into the community as possible?
So it's a great question because I really believe that the African gaming space, um, contrary to the stats that Brian was mentioning, I think will truly be worth billions in a
Yes.
few years. At the moment, the government says it's worth billions, but I think it will actually be a multi-billion-dollar industry uh, several years from now, because you have over 350 million people with connected smartphones already on the continent.
Mhm.
As KaiOS is coming on, that's another 700 million that are going to come online soon. And so it's going to be a massive industry. And we're really just at the very early days beginning of it. And we need to work together and cooperate to create that as an ecosystem. And I think that a lot of people believe that the game industry is really just game developers. People always think of it as a development element, coding and programming, but there's so much more. There's the illustrators, the animators, the voiceover artists, the musicians. We have hip hop rap musicians who are making soundtracks for our games, the marketers, the IP lawyers, the finance. I mean, there's so much that needs to go into building this industry. And we really do have to all come together and work together. And that's a big part of why we created the Game Development Center. And why we're hoping to replicate that into other markets across the continent to create and facilitate those communities so that we can then work together, because we have an opportunity here to shape this industry from the ground up. It's a clean sheet of paper,
Yeah.
which doesn't exist in Europe or North America, where we can say, okay, how do we want to build this industry? How do we want to make it inclusive from day one? How do we want to make it gender balanced? How do we want to make it potentially nonviolent is something that we're ascribing to, but not everybody will.
Yeah.
All these different elements of philosophical decisions that we can make because we're frankly designing it from day one.
Yeah, I can go on and on about inclusivity and the things I've seen, especially online, even in groups for gamers, and how very few of us females play games, especially in the continent, and the experiences we get to have when we try to be part of the community has not been very pleasant for a lot of people. But I'll not go into that. I'd like to know how we can bring in more global players to look at the African market. There are people we've been trying to reach out to even for the East Africa Championships, but they just don't see the potential in this continent. Kish, what do we need to do to ensure that they see that this is a huge market and there's a lot of potential, not just from the population being very young, but also the growth of not mobile, but also a lot of people coming into the internet? What do we need to do?
I mean, it would be amazing if I just gave you a one sentence magic answer and we solve the problem. There's multiple things. I'm just going to add a bit more on Jay when he mentioned, don't forget the YouTube bloggers and the esports players. These are all part of the amazing video games community.
Yes.
And again, I think bringing that into awareness that that's part of a healthy industry, especially esports. I hear so much in Africa and East Africa and Nairobi where esports players are out there. So that's a great potential of international world scale players sort of out there. Right now, I think it's an absolute fantastic time because having based in Britain or so, even although we are based in London or so, a lot of developers, publishers, people who have the finance or so would like a physical meet. But with COVID and everything, that's been cut out, which means geography should not be a barrier whatsoever. And you can actually start doing deals at an international level via Zoom call. In the past, yes, it was possible, but perception wise, it was like, nope, we need to physically meet people. So I think a lot of things are going to change this year in terms of the perception, which will be beneficial for people who otherwise would have felt, oh, we are in a strange corner of the world, which is crazy because Kenya is the center of the world, effectively, if you look at it. So yes, things like that, take advantage of that. And uh, mobile phones, somebody mentioned that, and you mentioned that as well. You've got a video games console. Everybody's got a video games console in their hand. The potential of that is fantastic. What other market would you want where everybody's got a video games console in their hand? So yes, I wouldn't underestimate a mobile phone and what they'll bring in and bringing content for that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Jake, this is a hard question, but how do we get our content into such global players? How do we make, video game console manufacturers look at the content that, the developers in this continent are working on?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the drivers for me coming here was actually seeing that in the kind of established industry, it's actually quite difficult to kind of be noticed, particularly if you're like a small developer. It's quite difficult to get kind of market cut through, and there's always this need for like new ideas. Ideally, not just new content, but new mechanics. Completely new ways of playing. And from the UK looking over to Africa, particularly Kenya, and seeing that there is this kind of this small but like heated group of developers already doing stuff. They're making games about like, I mean, this is like 6 years ago. They were making games about police corruption, yeah. and and trying to get your vote in to make sure that the I mean, that's actually quite representative of what's happening in the US now. Actual games about election corruption and stuff like that, and just seeing that there's potential for really interesting new ideas that just aren't around in the West. So there's that, coupled with the fact that in this continent, everyone's looking at it as it's the next billion users, right? Like you were saying, you've got this massive youth population that's kind of growing, and they're kind of they're going to have massive market leverage, these people, right? So it would be pretty silly of the massive companies, on the console level, on the device level, to overlook that market. And currently they are kind of overlooking it because they're not really making anything that's particularly relevant or even representative.
Yeah.
So I'd say correcting those two things is a massive opportunity as well. And it's kind of like echoing what Jay was saying, but for those guys to do it from abroad.
Yeah, come here, check out what is there. There's a lot of opportunities in the continent. This reminds me, there used to be a very interesting game called Matri Racer. I think 11 years ago, it was on Ovisto. It was a Kenyan game about the Matatu menace, and it had, I think, more than 1 million downloads, and we used to play it a lot on Nokia phones. But anyway, let me come back to the panel. How do we ensure that we work together? in the continent, especially in countries where we've seen a lot of movement in the gaming industry, in sports, in Kenya, in Senegal, in Rwanda, in Uganda, Ghana, Nigeria, Zambia, South Africa. Jay, what do we need to do to start working together?
I think conversations like this certainly help, and the Goethe Institute and things like Enter Africa that that are bringing developers together certainly help. But at the same time, I think we need to be cautious because there are a lot of opportunistic groups out there who have hackathons and programs, etc., that are really just trying to ride on the coattails of the local developers and saying, okay, submit your ideas, and then we'll bring your game to a local European developer and take 50% of the rights to it. And I think that the caution is required to make sure that we build this industry in Africa for Africa, and recognizing, as you said, looking at the international markets, there's two directions to that, right? There are certainly companies, and there's a few in South Africa that are building games for the Western markets.
Yes.
But then there's also all the Western companies, if you will, the international game developers, who are absolutely eyeing, as Jake said, the next billion that are coming online in Africa and that massive youth bulge of players. So we just have to come into it with our eyes open and do it very intentionally.
Yeah, that's a good point. Kish, you worked at Sony PlayStation for 8 years. How do we ensure we get more attention from such organizations?
So, yes, I was head of developer services for 8 years here, based in London for Sony PlayStation. I left Sony about 4 years ago. So, one of the biggest barrier back then was dev kits. As you can imagine, a lot of console manufacturers are very protective about this going into areas, and it's nothing to do with the developers or mistrust of developers, just the country and infrastructure and the custom and exercise, and you don't want kids getting lost. So there are a lot of those barriers which are actually disappearing now because you can use virtual machines to access and start developing for consoles. So things are changing, and for certain, I'm pretty sure you will be able to use remote servers. Platforms like Google Stadios and Amazon's new streaming services. So these are changing the landscape because you can sit anywhere and develop on a proprietary hardware. So that was one big barrier back then, which is changing now. I'm going to just elaborate a bit more on what Jack mentioned. He nailed it. Content. What Africa has, what Kenya has, what all the African countries have is some unique content which the world has not yet seen. Unique content by saying unique stories. You talked about the sorry, I forgot the name, but about Matatus or so.
Yeah.
I was on a panel in South Africa, and I think if I remember correctly, in Kenya, you've got this individuals called Chupadebe guys who come and collect tins and metals or so. So in Africa, in South Africa, they have something very similar. And somebody created a game of where this person just goes around collecting all metals and everything. And that game was quite a hit locally. And then that has great potential to spread out as well. So I think very similar. The African stories, the local stories, there's so much of richness which the world has not seen yet. I'll give you an example of, Stan Lee and a lot of white folks sat down and made Black Panther, and it took many, many years after that, and it is a global phenomena. And that's a story, such a rich story which just came out. So same with I'm not a game designer, but you could make a game about Chupadebe, but don't just make collecting tins or so. Make it something like Mario Kart. It should be fun and exciting. But that's such a unique story because in the West, most people don't even know that there are people who go around just collecting metal around your houses or so. So yes, I think what Africa has, and I'm going to re-emphasize, is just some amazing, unique content stories which the world would love to hear. And this is how you'd approach developers and publishers and show there's some unique content. Because keep in mind, everybody's tired of the usual same old stories and games or so. And that's why indie developers flourish, because they come up with innovative gameplay as well as new game ideas. And all console manufacturers are actually after that. So as I said, console manufacturers have a publishing division. Those are the ones you need to approach, and they'll be more than happy to listen to your game ideas and fund them, which is, I guess, the most important part.
Yes, yes, yes. That is a really good point. Now going to the content side, Wendy, as an artist, what can the industry do to at least support more artistic projects coming from developers and artists in the continent?
Okay. First, I'd like to add on to the question you asked on collaboration.
Yes, go ahead.
There's also the element of inter-country collaboration, and I remember as part of the Africa Comicade Gameathon, we were also awarding people who were in diverse teams, just to encourage people during the game jams to form teams with, people from other countries. And we noticed it was still a challenge because it's only one team that had a diverse, team. Yeah, so yeah, just giving incentives to make sure that people want to collaborate from different countries, not necessarily just, Kenyans working on the content alone. And so
What
on
can be done to
the
support?
question on supporting
Yes.
the content
Yeah.
creators, I feel like there's also the element of not being, most of us are self-taught. We're learning while we're doing it. So I feel like getting sponsorships on like, for instance, ADMI right now is offering a course, and it's equivalent to a degree at a Rupika in France. But then it's quite costly because it's like 1.2 million for the duration of 3 years. So if we could get sponsors coming in to sponsor the content creators so that we can also create quality content, because right now we're also learning as we go, and then again the industry is still growing, so we're also doing other things on the side. So I feel like as content creators, that would be really good to get sponsorship on, education. Yeah,
Thank,
to just further our skills.
thank you for that.
Sheila, just
Yes,
actually add on what Wendy was saying.
yes, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the things, just when we're talking about content, we also really need to be honest with what's happening in the industry right now.
Mhm.
We need to improve the quality of games that are coming out of the industry. I'm talking in terms of high fidelity output, in terms of, is it rich in story? What sort of narratives do you have in the game? What is the gameplay? How was it designed? I think for us to be able, with the internet right now and the world being a marble, the people, the target audiences are exposed to also what sort of games there are out there.
Mhm.
So the internet has really broken barriers. So the world is actually a small place right now. So if you want to develop a niche for local, let's say even not exporting gaming, but local gaming that is supposed to be consumed locally, we also really have to understand that within that ecosystem that exists, we also have a deficiency of specific skill sets that would allow us to come up with high fidelity games. So how do we make sure that some of this, how do we bridge some of these knowledge gaps? By collaborating. Of course, let me give you a classic example of a project we did, and we didn't have any prior knowledge to what sort of extent that would be. We worked on a film with Oculus, and the whole essence with working with them was the fact that they chose a local company to produce content in South Africa. So we shot a film in South Africa. But when we went through the whole production process, and we are working with one of the best immersive production companies in the States, our team actually got to learn different workflows and processes. And there in turn, we brought back that knowledge here in Kenya in terms of trying to show and scale the knowledge that we got from working with people in the West. So before we think about also creating content for the local people, remember these people are very exposed to high fidelity games. They're very exposed out there. So we really need to make sure that we improve that quality and bridge that knowledge gap, because we are going to have a situation where, remember, like what Jay says, we're actually building this from the ground up.
Yeah.
And for us to bring it from the ground up, it's very important for us to be cognizant to the fact that there are specific skills that we'll have to make sure during the whole, and just reiterating what Jay said, game is a very collaborative process. And for you to understand how it works, there's also a value chain that works. So how do we ensure that there's some form of value going through that whole chain? So that by the time I say I'm a game developer, I say I'm a game developer, but this is exactly what I'm doing within the whole value chain of the games. And I'm going to do it professionally based on the fact that I'm also benchmarking with what people are doing abroad. That's one of the few things I feel that we really need to be honest about the stuff that's coming out of Africa.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think I'll ask Jake this question about quality of productions and game we are producing locally. Are we matching up to global standards? And after that, how is the reception of locally made games from the local players and just the market locally? Jake?
Yeah. So again, one of the kind of positions I found myself in here is working with lots of small teams all over the continent. So Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, and I've been making games and other kind of digital media for about 20 years, and over time I've obviously built up a lot of experience and also a massive network of other people around that can just kind of help out on things. And that's the kind of thing that I tend to offer to all of these people that I work with, is just like, the kind of smoke and mirrors of how to make stuff look good. Like there's no kind of, there's no kind of like real magic to making high quality stuff. It's just like, you need a bit of experience and you need to know the tricks to do that cheaply. So that's kind of one of the things that I kind of bring to all the people that I work with. And I also think it's really important for people to try and actually, work directly with those people. So with my kind of local team in Kenya, so I've been working with developers here, Unity developers, but at the point where they can proceed because they didn't have the experience, right? Because they've only been doing it a few years, I would then bring in talent from the West, just my own network. So these are like writers, game designers. On our last game, the lead artist on that was the art director of Fall Guys, right? Which everyone knows about. Yeah. So, it's very easy to bring in these people if you know them and share their knowledge with your teams. The next thing that I always recommend to people, if they can possibly do it, is, try to work directly with these people, get a job, right? Very easy to say, much harder to do. But really, that's how, everybody in the established industry, they only got where they are because they have, started at the bottom, worked their way up, been surrounded by amazing talent and learned from them over, 10, 15 years. And that's the kind of opportunity that is really difficult to find here, obviously, because there is no established industry. So it's very difficult for anyone, to even see people around them or, people that they know that have actually made it in the industry. And, that kind of thing is not going to be a possibility for, another 10 years. So something has to happen there. And the best thing I've got at the moment is to, bring in talent where I can find it. So my local teams can learn from it.
Yeah, that's a good point. How about the reception of the games locally?
Sheila, can I just jump in for 1 second and add something to what Jake just said? Because I think it's a false narrative in the first place to ask the question of, can the African developers compete on a world-class basis in terms of development? Yeah. Because those borders have fallen down. It's no longer the case. Yeah. You have people like Brian, for example, who are working with the top developers in the world with Oculus. Yes. You have players here who are playing FIFA and have been raised on the international games. Yes. You have people like Jake, who's worked with one of the top studios in the UK, who have now come here, and Kish, who's from here and has gone there. Yes. So there's such fluidity now between the borders that it's no longer a single market. And more importantly, The developers here are using Unreal Engine and Unity and Maya and 3D Max, etc. They're the exact same tools that the top developers are using
Using,
in the
yes.
other markets.
Yeah.
And all you need is a laptop and internet connection, which frankly are better here than there anyhow. And so a lot of those barriers have fallen down. One of our top 3D animators at Asiku lives in the Likoni slum, but he has a perception neuron motion capture system that is world class, you know. And the global head of emerging markets for Xbox came to Kenya, saw what he's doing, and couldn't believe that we're building these kinds of 3D animations
Wow.
in the slums. And it really doesn't matter where you are anymore because the tool sets have unified across the globe. And so the question then is really what Jake was talking about is do you have access to
Yes.
learning and do you have the desire to learn? And these days, you know, with YouTube and Coursera and Udemy, you know, everything's available.
Yes.
You just have to have the drive to learn it.
But I think it's also important that they know communities that can expose them to these things. I think a lot of developers and gamers in general, we are mostly very introverted. We become very comfortable around similar people to us. How do they find out about such communities, for instance, Jay, with what you're doing, for them to plug into, you know, such opportunities, learn about such opportunities, get connected to networks that could connect them to opportunities to learn, to grow, and also tap into the global market?
There's so much these days.
Yeah.
There's so many websites. There's so many meetups happening. There's places like the Nairobi Game Development Center. I mean, just
Yes.
tap into them. Places like what Wendy was talking about, ADMI,
Yes.
the formal schools for education. And by the way, we offer a scholarship for all ADMI graduates. They get 6 months free membership at the Game Development Center to try and foster that next generation coming up, because that's what we really need as an industry.
Oh, that's a good point. What would you say, Brian, about getting such, you know, exposure opportunities? For instance, working with guys from Oculus, how do the local community get such opportunities?
That's a tricky question for me, and I want to be very honest with you. Primarily based on my background, you know, everything that I've known in gaming and XR, we are self-taught. We didn't go to any schools for it. But I think when you look at the fundamentals of the technology itself, whether or not it's on AAA engines like Unity or Unreal, you really need to understand how to optimize on that. This is like your basic, you know, like your basics. You really need to understand how to work with those engines. But I think also sometimes what is being taught in schools and primarily what the industry needs are totally different.
Yeah.
Like as much as I'm going to learn how to use Unity and optimize on Unity, the industry DNA is totally different from what I'm learning in schools. That's why I personally feel like when you have opportunities of internship or, you know, mentorship opportunities, or like what Jay is saying, you have opportunities where there are scholarships for people to understand. It's just not about development itself. It's understanding the marketing dynamic of it. Where's the economical value of it? How can we start supporting? How can we start supporting each other and understanding what really is the DNA of the industry? And that's where you find problems with, you know, there's people who've gotten degrees and they're not using their degrees to do any work whatsoever because their degrees are irrelevant in the marketplace. So I just feel for gaming, we really need to find out what are the real industry needs. Let's say, for instance, a project that we're doing for Coca-Cola. It's a simple gaming project. They had a new juice, and you could be able. And the idea was we created an interactive experience where you could customize your own juice by slashing different fruits into the juice bottle. Right? They had a hard time getting developers on that, simply because they are talking about the guys we are getting are not super reliable. There's also soft skills people need to understand about gaming. It's just not about developing. It's about also sitting down and coming up with a pitch deck for some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Remember, it's not everyone who works in an organized game developing center. You also have a lot of indie people developing stuff in their own small silos.
Yeah.
But for us, I think as industry protagonists, we really need to demystify what it means to be in the gaming industry. It's an industry that cannot be run by one person. It's very collaborative.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I think I'll come to the commercial and economic side of gaming after this question to Wendy. I mean, education has been criticized a lot in this, and I tend to agree with what Brian is saying. Are there any game developers schools, or do they also collaborate with art schools, if any, in Nairobi? I kind of know the answer to this, but please go ahead, Wendy.
All right. Yeah, so I think the only game developers school I know of is ADMI at the moment. Yeah, so
And then
there are
you
very
with
few.
game developer
Yeah.
groups where people teach themselves.
Oh, yes. And then there's the Africa Game Developers Community, which is organized by Ludwigworks. And we usually have trainings. The ones I mentioned, we used to have physical ones, and then they went online.
Yeah.
So usually we have international and also local people coming to speak on different topics, mostly educational ones. So there'll be someone speaking about writing, another on development. Yeah, so we do have as a community the sessions we have and the trained members. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So let's go to the gaming industry, looking at it from a business point. A lot of developers, to be very honest, develop games as a hobby. It's something you enjoy doing, and you want to make a game here and there. And we've seen a lot of these games even highlighted in the media locally. But you try and download the games to play them, they crash, the user interface is not as interactive as they claim it to be. But they also don't look at it as a whole, the business side of creating such content, or even making games that people can, be willing to pay for. In your experience, Jake, have you found that a lot of developers don't look at it from that whole perspective of it being an industry, having the professional standards to ensure professionalism with the clients, or even for themselves, the products they're making? Or how has it been for you, and what advice would you give anyone who's coming into the industry to look at it from that point?
Yeah, good question. I mean, well, look, a way to look at this is that I think anybody in the industry anywhere in the world, if they've only been doing it for 3 years, you wouldn't expect them to be able to think of everything. Like they might be a great, C# coder, or a brilliant animator or something like that, but you would never expect them to be an expert in every angle of game development. And I think the same goes for people here, right? And it is a very young industry here, and there just aren't people with that much time of experience.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of how it is. So it's actually hard to expect anyone to be able to see any kind of project from all those different angles, just because that's just not how humans do it, at that level of experience.
Yeah.
So, I've definitely worked with some really good people here, who I can see, with a bit more time, they would be, running their own studios, leading massive investment rounds, like whatever, but everybody's just, been doing it for only a few years, so you can't expect that of them.
Yeah.
And I'd say that about any junior I worked with anywhere in the world, like it's not kind of Kenya specific at all.
Yeah. I think we are trying to rush that because there's a lot of, I think, opportunities, but also the industry is growing quite significantly. To ensure that we plug into the different skill sets from different industry coming into the gaming industry, to bring in the expertise, be it lawyers, be it business development managers, even coaches for teams for esports, for instance, having, psychologists and psychiatrists, nutritionists, different people that we feel might help grow the teams, but also help people within the industry think of it as a business. Jay, what do we need to do to attract these people?
Well, I agree with what Jake said. I think it's a growth element, and it's an early industry at the moment, but it does need to be viewed as an industry.
Yes.
Like for example, there's a lot of backyard mechanics who like to tinker and make hot rod cars in their garages. But that's very different than going out and building a car company like Tesla, for example, and having factories and thousands of workers and union representatives and all that sort of thing. And I think there's a big difference between your best friend and you building a game in your bedrooms using Unity, and building a game company,
Yes.
which are very, very different things. And I started a digital marketing agency in 1999 in Southeast Asia, when there was no industry. And what we found was that you take adjacencies, you find people who are skilled in other areas, maybe in advertising or PR or whatever, but have the various skills that then get interested in the gaming industry and lob onto it. And I think the same thing will happen here as we bring on the digital marketers, the IP lawyers, the financiers, etc. But people who decide that they're tired of working in a boring industry and want to work in something that's fun. Um, and that game development, the actual, as I said before, the coding is just one small piece of it.
Yeah.
I run a game company, the largest in East Africa. I haven't written a line of code in years. Yes, I have a computer science degree, but that was a long, long time ago. There's so much more to running the business than actually just learning how to use Unity.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Kish, would you like to contribute to the growth question that
Yes,
I asked Jake?
absolutely.
Yes.
So just give you where we are in Europe, and I think US for sure. But I could tell you Europe, video games industry in UK, Europe is right now revenue wise bigger than film, TV, music industry combined. That's the amount of revenue, and I could just see that's going to trickle through around across the world as games become more accessible, and that's where it suddenly becomes a platform where a lot of individuals, echoing just what everybody just say, uh, why do the same job at a boring firm of lawyers, etc., when you can do the exact same job in a video games industry where you love that? And this happens, and we attract a lot of people, especially in the UK, just by telling them that, by the way, you know what you're doing in your day job, and you just say, oh no, it's Monday, I have to go to work. You can do the same job in the video games industry and say, oh yes, it's lovely. I'm going to be going back to work and working with amazing video game developers. So we actually make sure when we do panels in the UK, we always have somebody who's the non-traditional programmer artist sort of thing. So you'll have lawyers, accountants. We've also had once a personal assistant come on board, and they don't play games, but just showing that how passionate everybody is, and we think young. That's one amazing thing about our video games industry. Irrelevant of your age, it's just young thinking individuals with a lot of innovative ideas. And that's a very easy way to attract people who really are almost reached a career end of like, I'm just doing this job because I get a salary. And that's definitely going to come along. It's all exciting times in Africa very soon.
Yes.
I bet it's happening already.
It's starting to happen, yes. So it's getting there. So when you mentioned about festivals like this and how important they are, what do you think they play a role in developing the gaming industry?
Sorry, was that to me?
That was to Wendy. Are festivals like this important in developing the gaming industry? And if so, what roles do they play?
Okay. So yes, I feel like the festivals like this are very relevant. And yeah, the role they play is like, for instance, the way I just recently attended a Fakugezi festival, and I was part of a hackathon also before this, and our project won an award, and it was also showcased at the festival. So in a way, these festivals are giving content creators and game developers a platform to be seen and heard, and also for networking opportunities where now they can also open up, opportunities outside of the spaces they've been in. And yeah, I feel like also due to the current lack of sponsorships, that they're also helpful in educating game developers, like for instance with the workshops that will be taking place at this particular festival. So yeah, I think they're very relevant and coming in to help the development of the industry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Brian, what do we need to develop our industry further? But just before you answer that, in case you're following us on YouTube or on a mail stream and you have any questions, kindly post it on the chat. We will take those questions to the panelists. After this round of questions, we'll take your questions. Brian, what do we need to do to develop our industry further?
I think because we are building it from the ground up, it's very important that we also try to find ways in which we can start working together as industry protagonists. You know, we need to ensure that we start collaborating with each other to demonstrate some sense of value into the whole gaming and tech industry. Let me say, in terms of demystifying what gaming is, by virtue of being an African, a lot of the things that I've learned personally have been through other people. We learn through stories. You know, it's consistent. It's something that's a common denominator around most of the Kenyans I know and Africans. But I feel sometimes we also fail to talk about the stories of the successes of gaming. How else will someone at home want to be a gamer if they don't know any stories about a successful gamer?
Yeah.
We really need to start talking about that. We need to emphasize on the fact that the whole gaming thing needs to be demystified. You know, we always joke about it in the office and say, I don't know about you guys, but have you tried to make a dining table with a carpenter on Ngong Road? Or have you tried to deal with a plumber? Guys, these guys are like the worst, or a designer, a graphic designer. These are like the worst people you'll ever deal with because they don't even have soft skills. They don't understand what it means to commit on projects. We need to instill those values in that culture, because I feel like freedom without law is anarchy.
Yeah.
So there needs to be some form of a framework, some form of organization based on it, and people to talk about the successes of those stories and say, my name is who, and this is what I did, and demystify the whole process. For me to understand that if I need to build an economy, I cannot build it as an individual. It needs to be in the form of partnerships, collaborations, co-creations. I honestly am a radical, and I don't believe in involving the government in a lot of the work that we do. But also it's important that we actually sit down, because with government machinery, you can do a lot of things.
Yeah.
You understand the sort of processing power you need for rendering some of these games. If the government would come and say, okay, we are going to subsidize costs on A, B, and C, let's say for VR headsets, we're going to subsidize the cost of whoever is trying to bring up VR headsets, we're going to zero rate it or give you some good tax brackets on that. It's possible for us to do that. But one, I think we really need to talk about the success stories so that people can try to see where they are going. How will they see where they're going if they don't know who's been there before?
Yeah.
So I think from a narrative perspective, we need to start showcasing that. And also from an infrastructure perspective, we need to build soft infrastructure is already there. But I think when it comes to infrastructure, you know, talking to people and see if the government can say, okay, guys, we're going to give you a subsidy. We don't need the government to give you money, but we just need them to give us opportunities to support artists throughout this whole process.
Yeah.
And having festivals like this is very important, because I'm shocked, like in this Zoom call, we only have 10 participants.
Yeah.
Probably an event like this would have needed a bigger marketing budget. You know, it would have needed more partners involved with this, radio stations to come on board as partners, TV sponsors to come on board, so that a conversation like this, it's such an intriguing conversation, but it can't be based on 10 individuals.
Yeah. That, Brian has just gone into preaching mode. I was almost about to say amen. But you brought in some very, very important points about showcasing what is there in the industry. In the industry, plugging into festivals like this to learn what is happening, to see if there are any points of convergence and collaboration. We're not seeing a lot of that, Jay. Even in the championships that we have, a lot of developers are not, applying to collaborate or form teams to compete globally. What is happening?
Well, I think one big role that the festivals play and the hackathons play, particularly in non-COVID times when we're in physical places like the hackathon that we had at the Game Development Center in January, is the random collisions that happen between people. I've never met Kish before, didn't know that he existed, but he's really interesting, and now oh, I'd like to talk to him some more, and that's exactly what happens at festivals like this. Is getting these people together, and then you say, oh, maybe let's work on a project. Or the next time I have something and I need to know somebody who's worked at Sony before, I call Kish. Those kinds of things I think are really important, and that's what helps to build the industry. Because at the moment, game development by and large is a solitary exercise, especially because a lot of the game developers at the moment in Kenya are frankly starving. A lot of them have day jobs, and this is a side hustle, or they have no job and they're doing this to try and get an opportunity. And so they're not necessarily working in an office or a co-working space. They're doing it at home, and they're not interacting. There's a sense that I'm alone in this world. And what helps is at the hackathons and the festivals and all that sort of thing is that it brings people together, and you start to realize that you're not alone, and you start to learn from people like Jake, all the, as he said, the magic skills and tricks to polish over things to make them just that little bit better, and so that you become world class.
Yeah. Jake, would you like to also contribute to that?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the thing that I like with festivals like this, particularly, this kind of festival, which is all about creativity and, experimentation and free thinking and stuff. They're all the qualities that I look for in my developers, in my artists, my game designers, right? So people that don't just kind of rehash existing content or mechanics, but they experiment, they fail, they laugh at themselves, and then eventually they come up with stuff that's really interesting and original. And you see this already. There's loads of this stuff coming out of South Africa, like Semblance, which is actually developed by a Kenyan. Broforce was really funny. There was one even it was about 6 years ago called Viscera Cleanup Detail, which was a game where you were a cleaner on a space station that had just been attacked by aliens, right? And you had to go and clean up all the blood. And, it's just really interesting ideas like that, which, it's not going to come from school, it's going to come from the individual. It's going to come from events where you can just have fun with people, and actually just feel a bit bolder in funny, odd ideas, which eventually turn into great games that will sell really well.
Yeah. So Kish, what role does, festivals like this play in, I think, bringing people together? I think it's been mentioned severally, but not just people in the industry, also people outside of the industry. What role do you think?
It plays a tremendous role. And I think you raised a fantastic point there outside the industry. Globally, still, video games industry, and yes, multiple parties to blame, including media, is always categorized as, I'll give you it's sort of in the 80s or so, it was always rock and roll or music or so. They committed a crime or something, or they're antisocial because they were listening to rock and roll music or something. There have been phases in the world where people have always had something to blame to. Video games industry, unfortunately, has come along into that as well. And we are sort of so innovative and so adaptive into new technologies. So we grabbed social media and added it into video games industry. So you'd have thought right now video games would have a break just like rock and roll has. But no, people take video games as same as social media as well, which means, every time there's something bad which happens, they just say, all right, it was video games, it was playing a video game, etc. Or she, usually tends to be a he. But that's the level of perception these festivals and everything change to parents, mentors, teachers, because those are the individuals who a 14-year-old, even a 10-year-old who wants to have a career in the video games industry, they almost at that young age, they're told, no, get a real job. And especially, this is the case in Britain as well, and Europe and everywhere else, but I'm pretty certain it's the same thing in Kenya as well. Every parent, everybody wants their kid to be having the best accountancy, lawyer, doctor, that sort of a job. And video games industry should be in that vocabulary of a job. And festivals like this bring us into that this is a very credible industry. And that's so important to relay as a message to the world as well as locally.
Jay's mother still thinks video game is still not an
Oh, and it's not just Che or locally; it's globally. You know, even my dad wouldn't know what I do for a living. They'll just say, "Yeah, he works in the video games industry." It was easy for him to say, "I work for Sony," but as soon as I became self-employed, still doesn't know what I do for a living. And I've been 25 years in the video games industry, and that's the reality, unfortunately.
How do we change
My mom
this?
still waits for me to get a real job.
We might have to talk to her after this. But Brian, how do we change this perception? And while you answer that, there was also a question to you to elaborate on the issue of value. Did you hear me? Uh-oh, we lost your audio. Can you try and speak now?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Yes.
Perfect. I was trying to think. I think it's to just demystify what gaming, and for me, I call myself an XR evangelist.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do, we have 3Ds that is part of our mission. One is to democratize the technology,
Yes.
make it accessible to people. The second thing is to demystify it, to get a lot of people interacting with it. So we do this in forms of workshops, hackathons, discussions. And the third thing is to deploy it, to create infrastructure around it, both soft and hard infrastructure. So when you talk about this just falls under to demystify what we do. So that, can I tell you guys something? Putting the VR headset on my grandma was one of the craziest experiences ever. She thought it was pure juju.
We want the video.
Like I couldn't even dare take a video for that. Like she's been transported in this world that she didn't even ask to be in.
Mm-hmm.
Like we just really need to start demystifying what we do. So for them to understand, yes, I'm an XR evangelist. Have you tried to explain what extended reality technology is to your parents or to the people that love you? They don't get this stuff.
Yeah.
But then we just really need to have this sort of conversations and explain to them, guys, you see this game was created with maybe 100 people across the whole value chain. And this was my role in the whole thing, so that they can just start understanding it.
Yeah, and the issue of value, you mentioned value in your previous comment. There was a question to you around that to expound further.
Sorry, what was the thing on value?
I think you mentioned, let me just refer to the question. I think I'll come back to that. You mentioned about value in your previous sentiments, but I think I'll come to that. Wendy, there's a lot of diversity problem in this industry, not just from the developer side or content creators, but also from skill side, from people coming into the industry, but from the gaming side as well. I've personally experienced this. I game a lot, and unfortunately, the perception, even with the number of things that I've been doing in the technology industry, is gaming is for boys. How do we change this perception?
Okay. So I feel like there's a lot of how do I put it? Okay, for instance, I just spoke like a day ago on an all-female panel of game people within the game industry, not necessarily developers. So there was a marketer, there was a game developer, writers, and yeah, so people, women who are um, within the value chain of the development. And what I found from this conversation was that I feel like we need more of these, and also incentives to encourage women to attend such sessions, and also um, events, like for instance the Africa Comic-Aid Gameathon we were organizing. We also, in addition to the award we had for diversifying the teams in terms of intercountry engagements, we also had an award for all the women that participated in the game jam, and also the women who were participating during the sessions on YouTube, and also on the video conferencing we had, would also get tickets to Women in Games International Conference. So just finding ways to incentivize these things so that we get more diverse teams. And also in terms of um, not necessarily just women, also diversifying in the sense like for instance, the way Letty Arts um, came up with a project where they're even including people with cerebral palsy. So also thinking outside just gender, and also diversity in terms of sexual orientation, um, also people within um, um, this people with special needs. Sorry, yeah. So yeah, there are many things to think around it, but yeah, I feel like also finding incentives to encourage people to participate is important.
Thank you
Yeah.
for those points. So ensuring that we incentivize more women to come into the industry, encouraging teams to have diversity within their teams. And this brings me to something Jay has mentioned that I feel needs to come out. There's this perception that people who play games on their phone, for instance, they are not gamers, or people who play casual games, they are not gamers. Jay, tell us who are gamers.
Yeah, I think in this conversation, like many conversations around gaming, there's conflated these three different stakeholder groups of gamers, people who play casual games, and game developers. And even your last question about diversity within the gaming industry, and that games are mostly played by boys. Well, that's very
Yes,
different than games are developed mostly by boys.
that's
These
true.
are very different stakeholder groups. Um, I like to think of sort of the gamers, if you will, as your hardcore play a couple hours of games a day potentially, or play a game for many weeks on a dedicated gaming PC or a console. That's one community, and frankly, in Kenya, that's a very small
Small,
community
yes,
today.
yes.
And the esports, I would definitely put into that category.
So pro
But then you
gamers,
have, sorry,
pro gamers.
pro gamers, if you will.
Yeah,
Certainly, they're in there as well,
yeah,
right? But there's I think, a lot of amateur, if you
yes,
will,
yes.
people
Mm-hmm.
who have maybe even ambitions of being pro.
Okay.
But then you have the people who play casual games
Mm-hmm.
while they're sitting in a matatu, and they like to play Candy Crush or Angry Birds or whatever it may be. And when you look at the casual game, mobile game market globally, it's actually 60% women.
Yes,
It's not the
that's
teenage
true.
boys.
Yes,
The revenue is coming from a median age of 34.
yes,
That's who's spending the money. And that, again, is very different from the game development industry, which, again, globally has had a real issue from a diversity perspective.
yes.
But I think here, where we're starting fresh, we're doing a much better job of it, I like to think, in Kenya than globally. Um, Certainly in our industry, in our company, we certainly are gender balanced. We just created a game called Beautiful that's all about women's empowerment, that had an almost all female crew working on it. 3D designers, fashion designers, a singer songwriter. I mean, all of it was all female oriented because we were making a game for girls. So I just really think it's important not to conflate those communities
Yeah,
because it's easy to do, and I don't think it does service to the industry.
that's true. Yeah. I think Kish, you'd like to contribute to that as well?
Oh, yeah, I was just saying that it's inevitable. Will you get rid of this word gamer? We no longer say people who go and watch movie, they're moviegoers. If you probably remember in your CVs in the 90s or something, you'd put your hobby as a moviegoer. Now that would be the weirdest thing to put on there. Of course, everybody has Netflix or whatever else. So, and video games industry will be heading in that direction. In fact, again, I mean, in Europe and everywhere else, we expect everybody's, oh yeah, they play Candy Crush and everything. So why have this term video gamer? Everybody just plays games. And then, yes, absolutely, as Jay echoed that, content creators and everybody else should really just be creating content for the global market and the world itself. I'm going to touch a bit more on gender balance as well. Also, and Jake, it's such fantastic to hear. You've got a very good gender balance. So in Britain, our last census we did, it's only 20% women in the video games industry developing games, and that's such a powerful impact. I'm going to just mention Wendy here, just you turning up and the amazing you talking about video games can suddenly change a great population of females to be, because you're the role model, you're the pioneer on there, and they look forward to like, wow, if she can do it, I can do it. And that's such an important message out there. So yes, I think I hope one day we'll get rid of this word gamer, which certainly we will, like we've got rid of theater goers and movie goers and everything of that.
I hope so too. Yeah. And I agree with having more women, I think, faces in the industry, because I think it perception, and I think people seeing similar faces and relatability to what they are is very important. And I think that will change a lot in the industry. There's a lot of potential in the industry.
And it brings creativity. That's the
Yes.
thing. When you've got a diverse team, it makes better products. So it makes business sense.
I agree. Absolutely. Jake, I think you mentioned this industry is young, very young, but it's going somewhere. What do we need to do to ensure that that momentum is continuous? Or what more do we need to do to bring a lot more growth into the industry?
Well, I think there's time. You know, every studio, large or small, has a long history of making mistakes. You know, like Rovio is always the example people give. You know, they put out like 10, 20 games before they did Angry Birds.
Angry Birds, yeah.
You know, that kind of thing. So there's just time. There's investment. You know, the more money you put into a product or a studio, the better it's going to be. There's already some really great movement there, like Kira in Cameroon. They've got a great crowdfunding platform. There's Carry First in SA, who are already investing all over Africa.
Yeah.
You know, their latest signing was Kene in Ethiopia, who are already putting out some really good stuff. I think education is important. You know, like the industry is increasingly looking to people that are actually kind of officially qualified. I'm not sure anyone on this call is. I'm certainly not. You know, I studied graphic design, but I ended up in the industry. But that is changing. And I think culture is really important. So things like the Game Dev Center that Jay's running, festivals like this, and you know, particularly on the kind of diversity conversation, this idea of kind of see them to be them is really important, where you've got, you know, it's very difficult to imagine yourself doing a particular job if you can't see anyone else in the world doing it that's like you, right? So, you know, and that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So you end up, you know, basically just doing what your parents want you to do, which is become a doctor or whatever instead. So, you know, putting Kenyan African developers up there on a world stage will help people all over the world actually get into the industry. You know, same with the with all aspects of diversity. And that will also help convince parents to actually encourage their kids into this industry, you know, without having to show them the actual sales figures. which I hope some people are nowadays.
Yeah. Okay. I cannot believe we don't have time. I don't even know what happened. We were supposed to have some fun questions, but I'm so glad we've had this discussion because I feel it's very important in our industry for us to have, you know, discussions around the economic viability, inclusivity, about skills, about education collaboration, growing the community. I think it's important for us to have that discussion. I'd like to ask each of you, and I'll start with Wendy. What does the future hold for our industry?
All right, so I feel like the future is very bright for the industry. Considering beginning of this year, during one of our meetups, a woman came with her child. I think he's in Form 3. And she was inquiring about, she just wanted to find out more about the industry because the son is very interested. And this is so encouraging because, you know, I mean, it's very rare to see a parent who's interested in very new things like this, because most of the time, as most of us have mentioned on the panel, our parents and our close family do not understand what we do for a living. So yeah, I feel like that's very encouraging. And I also would like to speak about the importance of mentorship because my mentor, her name is Ngendo Muki. Okay, and she has been paramount in my getting to where I am right now. So the fact that there are mentors out there mentoring people like us is important, and we should continue doing this. And I look forward to passing it forward and also mentoring someone as well. Yeah, so I feel like the future is bright. Yeah, uh, that's it from me.
I think Sheila's lost her audio. Why don't maybe Brian, you want to just go next?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Sheila, I don't know if you can hear us. I think you've lost your audio. You're good? Okay, cool. Yeah, I see a lot of potential when it comes to mobile gaming. Simply because the African youth are constantly growing, the computing power of mobile phones are constantly increasing. I would like to see a future where a lot of people who want to get into gaming are going to be in a position to get into the industry when it is an industry. I feel like we still need, as protagonists, we still need a lot of work to, put in the industry. And also, I'd like to work with Jay on some projects. Of course, with Jay, we're communicating ever so often when we, there's something that comes up. Like I just want to see a lot of collaboration between also the stakeholders and partners. But then at the end of the day, it has to trickle down to what we call the Watus. They need to realize that this could be an industry, and we need to facilitate that growth from the ground up. So this is pretty much what I see happen, and I wish to happen.
Oh, now you can hear me. Oh,
yes.
Thank God. Thank you, co-moderator Jay. What do you think the future holds?
Crash and burn. It's just a fad. I don't think it won't be around 18 months from now. Flash in the pan.
We'll kick you out of this panel.
Absolutely. On to the next. Jake?
Yeah. No, I mean, Jay, I disagree, actually. Yeah, I mean, developers are going to continue to earn more. Their budgets are going to increase. The quality of their games are going to get better. That then attracts further investment. And hopefully that's a snowball effect, so everything's just going to get better and better and better. And pretty near future, I think there's going to be one or two solid IPs that hit the global market with a significant splash. I'd love to see that on PC and console, but it's probably going to be mobile. And also, I think, in the next year, we're probably going to see an African esports team ascending to the world stage. Kish?
Right. Yeah, we lost you again, so I'm going to take over. I see the future super exciting because we can all control it and we can all change the direction of where it goes. But as a developer, video games developers, I think it's such a fantastic time, especially because of the tools we use. The example middleware, we've got Unity and Unreal. These are actually now being used in the film industry as well. So the amount of transferable skill sets all of us are having are going to go across all these medias which have been well established. So again, that helps video games industry as naturally being a very, very serious career. And if you want your skill set actually are more transferable, in fact, anybody who's working in VR right now, your skill set are actually more valuable and much sorted in the film industry and sort of the multimedia industry. So I hope we don't lose such amazing developers if they stay in the video games industry. But Sam, as soon as you start getting wearable augmented reality devices, and they're coming soon as well, where they're going to look for content and developers is the video games industry. So this is fantastic that we are becoming such an important what's the right word? It's like I can't think of just an important industry, which
Yes.
everybody, quite a few other industries, including sports and film and music and everybody else industry, will want to tap into to create content for them. So yes, and if this is going to be my last word, I would also say asante sana, and it was really nice being on this panel.
Thank you. Finally. And yes, you at least got a chance to speak in Kiswahili. That was the plan for this. So thank you so much to our panelists. That was a brilliant discussion. We can't thank you enough. And thank you to our audience for joining us. We were honored to have you. We hope this discussion was meaningful to you as well. We would like to thank our partners, Aga Khan University, for providing the studio. We'd like to thank Goethe-Institut and Alliance Française and all our partners, the Nairobi bus for streaming, and everybody else who was able to join us. Thank you so much. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Yeah, we are not live anymore.
Excellent.
We're offline, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Well, we can actually check the live stream and I can tell you.